Hey friends, welcome back to Horror Stories Bedtime. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the rain outside slow your thoughts. Imagine a quiet house in a quiet town. One you know well enough to walk through in the dark. One that creaks in familiar places. Now imagine noticing one new sound. One light that shouldn't be on. And realizing it's been happening long before you ever noticed. My name's Lydia, and last winter, I agreed to house sit for my aunt in upstate New York while she visited her daughter in Florida. Her house sat at the end of a dead-end street, an old two-story colonial with blue shutters and a slanted roof that always looked like it was frowning. I'd stayed there many times before as a kid, so when she asked if I could keep an eye on it for 2 weeks, I said yes without thinking twice. It was mid-January, the kind of cold that turns your breath into tiny ghosts. The roads were icy, the sky flat and gray. When I arrived, the house was exactly as I remembered. The same smell of cedar and lavender. The same uneven creak in the stairs. The same little ceramic owl sitting by the entryway. She left me a list of instructions. Water the plants, bring in the mail. Keep the thermostat above 60. And don't worry if the attic light flickers sometimes. The wiring's old. I didn't think much of it. Old houses do that. For the first 3 nights, nothing strange happened. I worked remotely from the kitchen table. Made soup. Watched snow drift through the window. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels empty. The kind that hums, like it's breathing along with you. Then, on the 4th night, I woke up around 2:15 a.m. The house was still, the kind of still that presses against your ears. I got up for water, and as I passed the window on the landing, I saw something reflected in the glass. A faint yellow glow above the hallway. The attic light was on. I stood there for a second, half awake, half sure I was imagining it. The attic door was at the end of the hall. Just a small square hatch with a pull string. I'd never actually been up there. My aunt always said it was mostly insulation and old Christmas decorations. Still, I didn't remember turning that light on. And it wasn't flickering, it was steady. I went back to bed telling myself she'd meant that light when she mentioned the wiring. But part of me couldn't shake the thought. How did it turn on if there was no switch? The next morning, the light was off again. No sign of anything unusual. I checked the hatch. Still closed. String still hanging. That night, it happened again. At 2:13 a.m. sharp. A faint glow leaked from the crack around the attic door. No sound. No footsteps. Just that steady light. This time, I listened carefully. Nothing moved. No hum, no electrical buzz. Just silence. I almost climbed up to check. But something in me said no. Not yet. By the 5th night, I started keeping track. I set my phone alarm for 2:10 a.m. And sure enough, right on time, the light came on. I filmed it, thinking I'd show my aunt later. The video showed only darkness, then a soft glow spreading from above, then darkness again. No sound, no movement. But when I replayed it, I noticed something strange. At the exact second the light appeared, my phone's microphone caught a faint noise. A soft click, almost like a chain being unlatched. The next day, I searched the house top to bottom. The attic access was sealed tight. No footprints in the snow outside. The doors were locked. The power box was normal. No timer, no smart switch, nothing. But that night, I couldn't stop staring at the ceiling above my bed. Every little creak sounded deliberate. Every shift in the pipes felt like breath. At 2:13 a.m., the light came on again. But this time, I wasn't asleep. I got up slowly, grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, and walked to the hallway. The glow from the attic hatch painted a pale square on the ceiling. I stood under it, heart pounding. I pulled the string. The hatch opened with a soft sigh of dust and cold air. I climbed the first step of the fold-out ladder, shined the light upward. At first, all I saw was insulation and boxes. Then, something metallic glinted near the center of the attic. A small bulb swinging gently. And below it, in the dust, were footprints. Bare ones. Small. Child-sized. I froze. The air felt wrong. Too still. Like the whole house was waiting. Then I heard it. A slow creak from the far corner. I turned my light. Nothing. Just a pile of old trunks and a rocking horse missing one eye. I climbed one more rung, just enough to see over the floorboards. And that's when I saw it. A shape tucked behind the stack of boxes. Motionless. Small. Knees pulled to chest. I couldn't see its face. Just hair. Grayish-white like dust or ash. The light bulb flickered once, and when it steadied again, the shape was gone. I slammed the hatch shut so hard it rattled the hallway pictures. The next morning, I called my aunt. She sounded cheerful, like she was sipping orange juice on her porch. When I told her about the light, she went quiet. "Lydia," she said slowly, "you didn't open the attic, did you?" I told her I did once. Her breath caught. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "I told you not to worry about it. That light, it's on a motion sensor." I frowned. "Then why does it come on every night at 2:13? She hesitated, then said quietly, "It's not wired to the power anymore. It's been disconnected for years." That night, I barely slept. Every time the house shifted, I flinched. I kept the hallway light on. The door locked. The attic rope knotted around a hook so it couldn't open. But at 2:13, the light still came on. No sound. No movement. Just that soft yellow glow, bleeding through the ceiling, like the house was remembering something. And then, from directly above, I heard it. A single tiny laugh. When my aunt came home 3 days later, I was already gone. I left the key on the counter, and I never went back. A month after, she sent me a photo. The attic light had burned out completely. She wrote, "Guess whatever was up, there finally ran out of power." But in the photo, right next to the bulb, in the dust, you can still see a single footprint. Small, bare, facing the ladder. If you ever stay in a quiet house, and a light turns on at the same time every night, don't climb the ladder. Don't look. Some lights aren't for you. They're reminders. For whatever never left. Good night. Hey friends, welcome back to Horror Stories Bedtime. Before we begin, take a slow breath. Imagine the quiet you feel when everyone else is asleep, the house breathing, the clock ticking, the faint hum of the street somewhere outside. Tonight's story is about a sound that follows you everywhere, a footstep that is never yours, always one beat behind. My name is Ethan, and last year I moved into a small rental in a neighborhood outside Columbus. It was the kind of house people buy when they want enough space but not a mortgage that never ends. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a porch with a sagging swing. I liked it. I liked the quiet. I liked having a place that was only mine. I was 34, worked from home for a software company, and halfway through a divorce I didn't know how to stop. The silence in the house felt safe at first. No arguing, no shared bills, no compromises on the TV channel. I told myself I could breathe again. I told myself this is how new things start. The first week, everything was normal. I fixed the leaky sink, set up a desk by the window, and learned which neighbor owned the loud dog. Nights were short, and the house settled like an animal getting comfortable. Sometimes I would get up for water and hear the old pipes sing. It felt ordinary. Then on a Thursday night around 11 p.m., I went to the kitchen to make tea. I stepped down from the bedroom, and behind me, soft and slow, came a footstep. One click of heel against hardwood. I froze. My own step sounded ahead of that one in the hallway. I turned around. No one was there. The hallway light was off. Only the dim glow of the oven clock reached me. I told myself it was the floor settling. Old houses squeak. I said it out loud even though I was alone. I took my tea and went back to bed. The thought stayed, a small pebble in my shoe. The second night the same thing happened. I stood at the sink washing cups and felt the floor under my bare foot. I stepped down and heard it, the extra footstep, always one beat behind mine. Not matching me but following me like an echo. This time I didn't laugh it off. I listened. The sound moved through the house at the same pace I did. If I walked slow, it lagged behind slowly. If I hurried, it kept the same delay. It never overlapped with me. It never came first. It always followed. That week I started timing it. I wanted to know whether I was losing my mind. At 2:17 a.m. the house went still. My phone alarm set for 2:10. I walked to the hallway, then back, then to the kitchen. Click, the extra step. Click behind me. It felt like something studying me. The sound was not heavy. It was like someone tapping rubber soles against wood, polite, almost trying not to be noticed. I told a coworker at lunch. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Creepy. Maybe a raccoon in the attic." I laughed to myself but felt less brave when the sun went down. On Saturday, I stayed up late and decided to test it. I wore socks to change the sound of my steps and walked slow, then fast, then hopped. Always the second step came soft, the same distance behind my step. I tried to surprise it. I stopped suddenly, then lunged forward. The second step stopped exactly one beat later. Not a heartbeat, not a random creak, a footstep. Someone was moving in my house, matching me but behind. I set up a camera that weekend. I bought a cheap motion camera that writes to a small card. I placed it in the living room where I could see the entrance to the hallway. At midnight, I turned it on and waited, feeling foolish, like someone watching a bad movie alone. At 1:16 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the footage. The clip showed me walking from the kitchen into the hall, heading toward the bedroom. The time stamp was clear. I watched my own shape cross the frame. For a half second, the brightness of the hallway shifted. I slowed the file. A second figure appeared in the doorway, not solid, just a darker outline. It matched my motion, a little behind. When I played the clip frame by frame, my chest got tight. The outline had no face, no clothes detail, only a shape like a person wrapped in shadow. Then it was gone. The footage continued with only me. The last frames were empty. I posted it in a forum with a throwaway account. People said it could be a camera artifact or a delayed exposure. Someone suggested it might be a reflection from a window I didn't notice. The rational part of me wanted to agree. The part of me that slept on the couch for 2 nights wanted to find it a new place to be. A week later, my neighbor across the street, Mrs. Delgado, stopped by with cookies. We talked in the porch swing light. She had lived on the street for 30 years and knew everyone's story. She noticed my tired face and said, "You look like you haven't slept." I told her about the footsteps. She changed her smile into something with weight. "You moved into the Palmer house?" she asked. "Yeah, the one with the big oak." I took a bite of her cookie and tried to keep my hands steady. She lowered her voice. "There was a boy there once," she talked slowly. "Years back, he used to run the halls. He fell down the stairs near that bathroom." She pointed vaguely toward a stretch of lawn as if the words themselves needed distance. "People said he kept the house with his sound. Sound is a kind of memory, dear. Sometimes it doesn't leave. I thanked her and closed the door, but her words sat heavy in my mouth. Memory as sound. A boy falling. A footstep that followed. That night I put down tape markers on the floor and left a recorder running. I walked from the living room to the kitchen, then the hallway, then the bedroom. On the recording you can hear my shoes scuff, then a light step, then later another soft scuff. If you listen closely on headphones, as I did, there is a small, breathy whisper right when the second step falls. Not words, just a sound like someone taking a tiny breath. I woke sweating. The more I watched, the more precise the pattern became. The second step never increased speed. It always matched me step for step at the same delay, as if some invisible person had learned my pace and refused to leave. It was not aggressive. It never shoved the floorboards. It was there like someone politely trailing along, waiting for permission to walk beside you. I tried to speak to it one night. I stood in the dark hallway and said, "Who are you?" The house sat quiet. Then behind me the step came, click, click, a small childlike breath, a tiny noise like a laugh but smaller, like a word half-formed. Then I turned on the light. Nothing. Nothing but the wallpaper and the family photos lined up in the hallway, eyes smiling from framed glass. The steps also seemed to have a rule. They never entered a room first. If I opened a door and stepped inside, the second step always came after, as if the thing waited outside the room until I had called it in. Once, when I slammed a door shut between us, I could feel the soft thud of something halting outside. It was as if it respected walls and thresholds the way people do. The house felt sleepy by day, but nights were rehearsals. I tried to read, to drown it out with audio books, but even in my headphones the second step seemed to find the rhythm in my breath. I'd catch myself listening for it, my body tensing whenever the floor creaked. After 3 weeks of this, I thought of leaving. I packed a bag and drove to my sister's place 2 towns over. I stayed on her couch and slept like someone who had been given quiet. For 2 nights, no footsteps followed me. I breathed in someone else's air and thought I might be okay. But on the morning of the 3rd day, I received a text I didn't expect. "You forgot your jacket." No number. I recognized the jacket, the one I'd worn the week I moved stuff in. Under the message was a photo, the back of my rental house with my car parked in front. Someone had taken the picture from the sidewalk exactly at 7:02 a.m. and then sent it. My stomach dropped. I drove home to find the screen door still closed and the house exactly as I'd left it. I told myself to call the police. I told myself to move out. I told myself 100 sensible things. I called Mrs. Delgado and asked whether she had seen anything odd. She hesitated, then said, "People drive by sometimes. Kids ride bikes. There are always eyes around." I didn't believe her. That night back at the house, the steps were different. They came earlier, as if impatient. Click, click, click. Instead of following my pace exactly, the extra step moved a beat faster toward the front door and then stopped. Outside, the porch light hummed. I walked to the door and looked out. There were no children, no cars, only the dark street and a silhouette of the oak tree waiting like a giant. I thought of the boy who fell down the stairs. I thought of the way houses keep doing what they know. If sound is memory, maybe it was repeating the night it couldn't stop. Maybe footsteps can rehearse forever. So I did something I hadn't wanted to do. I set up more cameras, one in the hallway, one pointed down at the main stairwell, one with a narrow lens trained on the front door. I wanted proof, and proof felt like an answer. I stayed awake that night with coffee and the camera lights blinking quietly in a row like sentries. At 2:03 a.m., motion alerts lit my phone. I opened the files. The hallway camera showed me moving through. The stairwell camera was blank for a second, and then the small outline appeared. This time clearer than before, it rose on the steps and reached out as if to steady someone who had missed their footing. For a single frame, I saw the shape of a small hand resting on the railing. On the frame after that, the railing trembled slightly, though no one touched it in the footage. I backed up the file frame by frame. The outline looked like a child, small legs, thin shoulders, head bowed, but it was not translucent. The pixels suggested something solid but distant, like a photograph a year old that had been reprinted. The stairwell camera, positioned low, showed no face. The footage was strange. Sometimes it captured a dark patch, other times it washed the area with a soft grain. The stairwell always looked colder than the hallway around it. I showed the files to a friend who works in video editing. He squinted and said, "Could be a lag or a double exposure on the sensor." He offered to run it through software. He sent me a message later. "It's not a lag, something in the frames." He wouldn't say more. The way he wrote made me feel like I had sent him a photograph of teeth. The sheriff came by when I reported the pictures. He was polite and kind, a man used to small-town ghost stories and actual reports. He asked me if anyone had a key, if I'd had visitors, whether the cameras were tampered with. I told him about the boy. He listened like a man who'd heard similar things before, about a house that retains people. He made a note and left with a promise to check the property line for footprints in the snow. He called back in the morning and said the yard was clear. I tried to live normally. I went to work, attended meetings, answered emails. But the second step always trailed me home, not only in the house. Once, walking from the car across the grocery parking lot, I heard it behind me between each slab of concrete. The sound on asphalt was different, hollow, echoing, but unmistakable. When I spun around, a woman pushing a cart glanced at me and frowned. No one else heard it. The sound didn't want only to follow me. It wanted me to watch it follow me. That was the cruelty. It forced me into a life of looking over my shoulder, of checking the hallway, of laying out the camera cards and reviewing footage until my eyes blurred. Then one afternoon, I found an old newspaper clipping tucked behind a frame on my wall. I must have hung the frame myself months before, but I'd never noticed what was behind it. The clipping was yellowed and brittle. The headline read, "Local boy falls down STAIRS, family SEKS answers." The date was 30 years ago. The boy's name was Tommy Palmer. The story said he'd been 7 when he fell, that the family moved away, and that the house stood empty for a while afterwards. Below the article was a small note written in pencil. "He waits the way people wait for familiar doors." My hand felt numb reading it. That night the second step grew bold. As I walked through the house, it matched me closely, not one beat but sometimes half a beat. Once, as I turned toward the living room, the sound hesitated, and then a whisper that this time was clear enough to be a word. Home. Not malicious, not angry, just simple, like a child calling back. I sat down on the sofa and spoke aloud. "Tommy, is that you?" My voice shook. The house answered with the softest step. It came right behind me and stopped, close enough that the air at the back of my neck felt cooler. "Tommy," I said again, "why won't you leave?" A long pause. The house hummed. Then a sound like a small hand rubbing the banister. Then from the stairwell, a small, childlike voice said a single sentence I can't unhear. It said, "I forgot how to go." The simplest answer is the worst kind, small, private, and impossible to fix. It suggested a night where no one taught him to step clear of the edge, or where the world closed too fast. It suggested memory caught and looping. I thought about calling someone, about therapy for myself, for the house. But how do you fix a memory that keeps walking? How do you teach a sound to stop following a person? I considered inviting people over to stay, to make the house fuller of living noise, to drown it out. I thought of playing music all night, of filling the rooms with voices. But the second step didn't only belong to loneliness. It belonged to a story, and stories have ways of listening. So I tried something else. I sat at the bottom of the stairs with a thermos of coffee and waited. At 2:03 in the morning, the house sighed and the steps came. Click, click, click. They moved slowly up the stairs and stopped at the landing. I called softly, "Tommy," and then quieter, "I'm here." One of the frames on the wall, a family photo from years ago I'd never paid attention to, shook slightly as if someone leaned against it. The step came down the stairs and stopped before the living room. Then I heard, clear as a bell, the tiny patter of bare feet running across an empty room without the weight of time, and then nothing. The next day there was dust on the stair railing where no dust had been before, and a small handprint faint in the new frost on the outside window, the size of a child. It was a sign not of malice but of presence. I found myself feeling something like a low compassion, the kind that sits with a stranger who cries on a bench. The idea formed. Maybe the thing following me doesn't want to harm me. Maybe it wants company and a way back out. That week I started leaving a small mug full of cocoa and a pair of mittens on the landing. No one took them. I left notes on the newel post written with pencil. "Tommy, if you're here, stay where I can see you." The steps slowed as if reading. On the 12th night something changed. I came home late and went straight to the kitchen. I called out softly, "Tommy, it's Ethan." No answer. I climbed the stairs and paused on the first step. The second step came behind me longer than usual, as if it had been walking. I turned, and there, at the top of the stairs, stood a small figure in the corner of the landing, shadowy but definite. I could see the outline of a child's head, hair flattened by cold. The step must have been his, because it stood still and did not move closer. My throat tightened. I took one slow breath, and the figure, after a pause, took one step forward and then another. Not in the endless following manner, but in a steady line. It walked down the stair, not behind me, but in front, as if leading. Each footfall matched the floor. Each was careful, like someone learning to be solid in a house. I followed. We went into the living room and paused by the window. The figure stood on tiptoe and pressed a hand to the glass, then turned and looked up at me. For a moment, a small, long moment, I could see the outline of a face. It was small and somehow older than the child's size suggested, as if years were folded into too short a body. He nodded once. Then he walked slowly toward the attic door. He reached up and tugged on the string. The attic light did not come on. The hatch did not open by itself. For the first time in weeks, I reached up and pulled the string myself. The hatch swung open with a long sigh. The attic smelled of dust and warm air. I shone my flashlight in and saw, in the corner, a small pile of toys and a torn photograph of a family. The figure, Tommy, or something that had learned to be called that, slipped under the rafters and sat down among the boxes. He looked at me and, without moving his lips, said one slow word: "Home." I sat down on the ladder and put my hand on the wood. The house felt different, less like a thing that keeps people, and more like a place where someone could be taught to go on. I put the mugs of cocoa down beside him and felt foolish and soft. The next morning I woke and there was no second step. For the first time in a long time, the house was quiet in the ordinary way. I went through the day with a lightness I hadn't carried in months. In the afternoon, I climbed into the attic to find the toys cleared away and the torn photograph placed carefully on a beam. There was also a small note in neat block letters. "Thank you." My hands shook as I read it. After that, the sound did not follow me every night. Sometimes, if the house was empty and the wind right, I would catch a faint echo of a soft footfall at the far end of the hall, as if someone were practicing walking. Once in a while, I would hear a laugh, like someone learning to hold a sound steady. But the relentless, ghostly following stopped. People often ask me if I was scared. I was. I am. But fear is not a single thing. It is many small choices about what to do when the house raises its head and reminds you there are things it remembers better than people do. I moved out the following spring, not because the house was dangerous, but because some rooms keep names and some people need other rooms to breathe. Before I left, I put a small plaque on the mantel, "For those learning to remember." I left the mittens by the newel post. I left a note in the attic that said, "Go on." I drove away with the windows down and the road long and empty ahead. If you live alone and you hear footsteps that aren't yours, don't assume they are a threat. Sometimes they are someone repeating a single night until they remember how it ends. Sometimes they are a cry that needs listening more than locking. If you can, try to meet the sound with kindness. It will not always be safe. It will not always be wise. But sometimes the simplest thing, a warm cup left on a stair, is what teaches a sound to stop following. Good night. Hey friends, welcome back to Horror Stories Bedtime. Before we begin, take a slow breath. Listen to the rain. Imagine you're home alone, lights low, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left. You've had dinner, locked the doors, checked your phone one last time. And then someone knocks. Softly, rhythmically, like they already know you're awake. My name's Nora, and I live in a small town in northern Illinois, the kind of place where everybody waves but nobody really talks. I rent a 2-bedroom house on a corner lot, near a streetlight that hums all night long. It's quiet here. Too quiet sometimes, especially since my breakup. I'd been living alone for 3 months when the knocking started. It was early November, cold enough that you could see your breath outside, but not enough for snow yet. The wind carried that dry leaf smell, sharp, brittle, restless. I'd come home from a double shift at the diner, kicked off my shoes, and put water on for tea. The clock on the microwave said 10:47 p.m. I remember because it was exactly 7 minutes before I always tried to go to bed. That's when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 taps. Even calm, not loud. I froze. My first thought was delivery driver, but there was no car sound. No headlights through the blinds. And who delivers anything at that hour? I waited. Nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, I walked to the door. I didn't open it. I just looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. The streetlight hummed. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk. I told myself it was a prank, maybe kids from down the block. I double-checked the lock and went to bed. The next night, it happened again. Same time, 10:47 p.m. 3 knocks. Even calm. This time I turned the TV volume down and waited. After the third knock, a pause. Maybe 15 seconds. Then the faint sound of shoes on gravel. By the time I got to the window, the street was empty again. I started to wonder if maybe it was just the wind making something tap against the porch. But when I stepped outside the next morning, there was something small on the welcome mat. A folded piece of paper, soggy from dew. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed. All it said was, "Sorry for disturbing you." No name. No number. Just that. I brought it inside and threw it in the trash. But all day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Sorry for disturbing you. Like it wasn't an accident. Like they knew. That night, I left the porch light on and kept the TV playing low. I wanted background noise. Something normal. At 10:47. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The knocks came once. Paused. And then one softer tap, like a fingertip brushing wood. This time, I recorded it. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and waited another minute before looking outside. No one there. But when I listened to the playback later, I noticed something strange. Underneath the knocks, barely audible, was another sound. A voice maybe. Low, muffled, like someone whispering through fabric. It said 3 words. "Are you home?" By the 4th night, I was scared enough to tell someone. I called my sister Claire, who lived 2 towns over. She laughed it off at first, said maybe it was a stray Amazon package or a raccoon. When I played her the recording, she stopped laughing. "You need to call the police," she said. But I didn't. Because what was I going to say? Someone's politely knocking on my door. Still, that night I kept the porch light off. I wanted to see if the dark would make a difference. 10:47 p.m. came and went. Nothing. No knocks. No sound. I stayed up until midnight. Then finally let myself relax. Maybe it really had been nothing. Maybe whoever it was realized they had the wrong house. I turned off the lights, brushed my teeth. And that's when I heard it. Knock. Just one this time. Quiet. Slow. Right after I turned the bathroom light off. It came from the back door. The back door opens into the small yard behind the kitchen. It's fenced, with a single gate that stays padlocked. No one should have been back there. I crept into the kitchen, barefoot, heart pounding. The moonlight through the blinds striped the floor. I reached for the curtain above the sink, just enough to peek. And I froze. Someone was standing in the yard. A tall figure not moving, facing the house. They weren't close, maybe 15 feet away. But I could see their breath fogging in the cold air. They lifted one hand, slowly, and tapped the fence. Tap, tap, tap. Then lowered their arm and turned away, walking calmly toward the trees. I called out, I don't even know why. But they didn't look back. The police came 20 minutes later. 2 officers walked the yard, checked the gate, took my statement. They said there were footprints in the dirt. Bare ones. No shoes. No socks. Probably some local messing around, one officer said. Doesn't sound dangerous, but if it happens again, call right away. They left me with a case number and a tired smile. I didn't sleep that night. For a week, nothing happened. No knocks, no notes. No shapes outside the window. I tried to move on. Then one Friday morning, I found a new note in the mailbox. Plain paper. Same printed font. You didn't answer. That night, I left my porch light off again. But I sat by the front window with my phone ready. I waited. 10:40, 10:45, 10:47. Nothing. 10:49, 10:51. Then knock, knock, knock. I started recording again. The sound was the same, but slower, like the person was waiting between knocks. When it stopped, I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. Then through the door, so soft I thought I imagined it, came a whisper, "Can I come in?" My throat locked. The voice wasn't angry. It was almost pleading, like someone cold asking to be let out of the rain. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard the sound of shoes walking away. Then silence. I called the police again. When they arrived, they checked the porch, no one. No footprints this time. No camera footage from neighbors either. The officer asked, "Have you noticed anyone following you? Any exes? Neighbors acting strange?" I shook my head. He sighed and said, "Sometimes these things stop on their own." That was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. I started sleeping with a lamp on. The knocking stopped for several days. Then one night, around 1:12 a.m., I woke to my phone buzzing. It was a text from an unknown number. No name. I'm at the door. I felt a chill like ice down my back. I didn't move. A minute later, another text. "You can answer now." I got up slowly, peered through the peephole. Nothing there. Then, the phone buzzed again. "Look lower." I crouched, and for a moment, I saw something through the gap at the bottom of the door. Bare feet, dirty, standing perfectly still. Then the feet turned and walked away. By morning, I decided to install a security camera. I bought one of those motion-activated doorbell cameras with two-way audio. It gave me some comfort, the idea of catching whoever this was. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Then on the 3rd night, I got an alert at 10:47 p.m. Motion detected. I opened the live feed. There was someone on the porch. Tall, pale, wearing a gray hoodie pulled low. They stood perfectly still, facing the door. I turned on the two-way speaker. "Leave," I said. "I'm calling the police." The person didn't move. Didn't even blink. Then, after a long silence, they leaned toward the camera, close enough that the screen filled with gray fabric and a shadowed mouth. And they whispered, "It's open." Then the feed cut to static. I ran to the door, but it was still locked. No one outside. Nothing. The next morning, I reviewed the saved footage. It showed the figure standing there. Then, mid-frame, it glitched. For one frame, you could see the door slightly ajar. And on the next, the figure was gone. I moved out 2 weeks later. Left the lease early. Didn't even ask for my deposit back. A few months after that, my sister texted me a link. Another listing, same house, new tenants. The reviews were all normal except one. Nice place, quiet street. Except someone keeps knocking at night. If you ever live alone, and someone knocks softly, always the same time, always the same way, don't open the door. Don't say a word. Because sometimes, the person on the other side isn't trying to get in. They're trying to find out who's still there. Good night. Hey friends, welcome back to Horror Stories Bedtime. Take a deep breath. Let the room settle. Imagine an older house, the kind with a corner TV that always seems too big for the room, with rabbit ear antennas or a flat screen that still feels like it remembers signal bars. Tonight's story is about watching the thing in your living room watch you back, not with eyes, but with recordings of the life you didn't know it had seen. My name is Evelyn and I am retired. I live alone now in a small ranch house on the edge of town. I taught second grade for 30 years. I liked routine. My morning coffee at 7:30, sweeping the porch Wednesday afternoons, calling my sister on Sundays. After my husband died, the house felt larger than I ever expected, but I liked the quiet. I liked the little clicks and the way the radiator puffed in winter. Those sounds were company. My television is old, not from the days of dials and knobs, but an older flat screen that still hums when I turn it on. I use it mostly for the evening news and once in a while a movie. I do not stream much. I keep it simple. A small digital antenna, a few channels, and sometimes, when I want noise, a classic show on in the background while I knit. The first time it happened, I blamed my hearing. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of the television humming softly. The clock said 2:30 a.m. The TV remote was on the arm of the chair where I always dropped it. I turned on the lamp, blinked the sleep out of my eyes, and padded to the living room in my slippers. The TV screen was on, not bright, not loud, just the soft gray light of static, the kind that looks like snow if you remember early cable days. But this static had shapes in it if you watch, little outlines like faces passing behind the gray. I stood there, wrapped in my robe, and felt my heart do a small, surprised jump. I turned it off. The next morning I told myself I'd been dreaming. I had been knitting and dozed off, maybe. Old people fall asleep with the TV more than they would have liked to admit. I made coffee and went about my day. That night the TV was on again when I woke. This time the static had motion like slow film. I could make out the corner of my kitchen table in the gray, then the back of a chair, then, for a moment, the shape of me walking by with a mug. I froze. The image was always grainy, like a memory seen through old glass, but I recognized the way my cardigan hangs, the way I hold my mug when I'm tired. For a second, I felt like the house had been watching me all evening and had finally decided to replay it for a stranger. I photographed the screen with my phone. The photo was just gray. The shapes didn't show up in a single still image. Only when I watched the moving static did they become a story. I told my daughter about it over the phone the next day. She laughed at first. "Maybe a local station is testing equipment," she said. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll come by next weekend and we'll get the antenna sorted." I nodded and tried to believe her. The third night, the TV showed more than my kitchen. The static crawled like fog, and then the image steadied for a moment on a shot of me putting on my coat in the morning. The timestamp, if you could call it that, was wrong. The image looked older, the light different, like late autumn. Then the scene changed to my porch just after sundown, and I could see someone, not me, standing near the mailbox. The person was looking down, not at me, but at something in their hands. I thought of burglary, of cameras, of anyone who might have hidden a lens in the porch light. I went outside with a flashlight. The porch was empty. The mailbox was closed. The siding was the same familiar white. No sign of anyone lingering. The feeling that I'd been watched tightened inside my chest. After a week of this, I did what you might expect. I unplugged the antenna. I tried different outlets. I stood in the living room and swept the remote battery out and shook the set like you might shake an uncooperative jar. Nothing changed. The static still played its slow little films when the set was powered with the remote or the button on the panel. When the screen was truly off, cord unplugged and everything. There was no motion, of course. But when I turned it on again, it would resume. The recordings were never the same twice. Sometimes they showed me making tea. Sometimes they showed the living room with my cat jumping up onto the armchair. Once, the static held a long, steady shot of the hallway at 3:02 a.m., and a figure moved across it like a shadow passing through a doorway. The figure had my build and my walk, but not my clothes. It wore something darker, a coat maybe, and it walked with purpose, not the absent way I wander at night. It began to feel less like an accident and more like a message. The scariest thing was not what I saw on the screen, but what the screen saw that I did not. There were clips of rooms at hours when I remembered being out, at small shops, at the library. The static showed the inside of my house at night, yes, but sometimes it displayed places I recognized from childhood photographs. The old elementary school gym where I used to volunteer, the back porch of my mother's home before she sold it. It was as if the TV knew more than my own memory. One night I fastened the DVR I'd bought years ago to the set and set it to record whatever input came through when the antenna was attached. If the images were real, I wanted proof. If the images were tricks, I wanted to catch them in a trap. Sleep left me thin and sharp. At 2:09 a.m., the antenna hummed and the static began. I watched with a cup wrapped between my hands, cold, trying not to blink. For 20 minutes the screen played nothing but the gray snow. Then very slowly the snow parted and an image took the whole frame, my kitchen table from above. The camera slowly panned, showing room and chairs, then paused on an envelope lying face down. On the envelope was my name in handwritten blue ink. My breath left me. I recognized that stationery. It was the kind my brother uses for letters, but he was out of state. He was well. I called his number the next morning and he said he'd not mailed anything. He didn't even have my new address. I hadn't told him. When I reviewed the DVR footage later, I could watch the scene as many times as I wanted. I could pause. I could slow it down. The envelope did not move. Then out of frame, a hand, thin and pale, reached in and picked it up. The hand did not look like mine in the footage. It was long and bone-thin, like someone who'd lived a long, careful life. The hand turned the envelope over, and for a breath the camera held the back of the paper where someone had written, in small block letters, "Don't leave." I called the police then. I didn't tell them about the words. I told them the TV was acting up, that I was spooked, that perhaps a service tech could look at wiring or a neighbor had a device. The officer who came out was young and polite. He checked outside, peered at the porch, spoke with neighbors. None of them had cameras pointed my way. He checked the set and shrugged. To him, it was an electrical problem. He left with a business card and the promise to call if anything suspicious happened. He did not meaningfully. That evening, I received a postcard in the mail. No return address. The front had a photo of a small lake summer scene, the very lake where my family used to picnic when I was a child. On the back, in the same small handwriting I'd seen on the envelope, was scrawled one sentence: "We saw you today." My hands went cold. I read the card 3 times, then placed it face down on the coffee table. That night the TV did not show me. It showed instead someone sitting at a bench by that lake, their head down. It showed their hands holding an old, water-worn toy boat. The colors were sun-stiff and bright, like a photograph left in the sun too long. I started to leave the set off, to put the remote away, to draw a small towel over the screen like a shroud. For a while it worked, but one night when I returned from the store and turned the key in the lock, the television was on. It had turned itself on again. The image that greeted me was of my own front hallway. In the video, my shoes were still by the door. In the video, my keys were in the bowl. I stood there in my coat, and the TV showed me in slow replay, sudden and present and more alone than the screen made me feel. The recordings shifted from being memory films to time capsules that knew what I could not see. It was not just me. It was the house itself. And sometimes in the static, there were frames that looked like the inside of my bedroom at 4 a.m., and in those frames, faint and grainy, someone else lay in my bed facing away. A second later, the image would flicker to gray again. One morning, I found a photograph tucked under the remote, a small instant print, the kind that develops in your hand. It showed my living room from the vantage of the doorway. There was someone sitting in my usual chair, back straight, hands folded. The printed caption on the white margin said only "We watch" in handwriting I did not know. Up until then, I had believed ordinary explanations: wiring quirks, stray broadcast echoes, a neighbor's baby monitor tuned to the wrong frequency. But the notes, the postcard, the photographs, they made ordinary explanations creak. Someone or something knew my house and the way I moved through it. I called my neighbor Henry, a quiet man who worked nights at the mill. He came by the next day with a thermos of coffee and the kind of tools you keep for small chores. He listened to me explain, and then he said something that made my stomach hollow. "Old TVs pick up time," he said, not like a joke. "They hold echoes, that's what I always figured. You know how new phones store locations? Maybe old sets do the same with places. They keep scraps." "You really believe that?" I asked, half laughing. He shrugged. "I believe the house remembers." He took a sip. Then, quieter, "I also believe some things in this town don't like being watched back." That night I unplugged every appliance that touched the same circuit as the TV. I sat in the dark and read until my eyes wanted sleep. At 1 in the morning I woke to a soft sound, not the TV, not quite. A TV-like hiss, yes, but thinner, coming from the kitchen. I went to look. The microwave was unplugged. The radio on the shelf was quiet. The television, however, had flicked itself on to a scene of the very kitchen where I stood. On the screen, a kettle steamed on the stove, though my stove was dead cold. A slow shadow crossed the image, moving like a cloud. Then, very carefully, in the lower corner of the screen, the words formed, not typed, but as if scratched into the image: "Stay." I walked to the set. My pulse beat in my throat. I reached out and turned the television off with the button. The room went dark and quiet. For a long time I sat on the couch with my hands clasped together until the dawn came thin and pale along the curtains. I moved the television to the garage the next day and unplugged it for a week. I told myself I'd be sensible, bring in a new set, fresh from the store. No old echoes to tangle me. But at night, when the house was completely silent, I still imagined pictures moving in the dark, frames of a life that had been watched and saved. Sometimes the imagining is footwork for what comes next. 2 weeks later, on a rain night that left the road shining, old television delivered the last message I could not ignore. I brought the set back in for a third time, more out of curiosity than reason, more because it felt like a bone I had to turn over. I plugged it in, and the turning on felt like letting someone know you were home. The screen showed the hallway and then slow-mo panning to the mantel, then to the window, and then there it was, a small, slow image of the bed. On the bed, a person sat up. It was me, or like me, with hair tumbled, one hand moving to the mouth as if to call out. The caption written across the white margins this time said, "We're lonely." I put my head in my hands. The loneliness in that sentence echoed me back to me. It was not an accusation only. It was a confession. It sounded like a small plea from something that had watched and stored and then learned to ask. I donated the TV to the thrift store the next day. I left a note at the counter. "Does not work, for parts." The woman behind the desk, the kind who takes things for a living, looked at me and said, "Old sets are weird. People toss them for a reason." She packed it into the back of the van without asking questions. I felt like I had surrendered a secret. For a while things eased. I bought a new set with a smart box and very few cables. The images were crisp and dull, the way new things are. No static, no messages. I slept better. Months went by without incident. I turned the TV on and off, watched the morning show and the evening news, and the house settled into a normal rhythm. Still, sometimes in the small hours, I would wake with that old anxiety curling in the back of my neck. I would think of the instant prints, the postcard, the scratchy words. "Don't leave. We watch. Stay. We're lonely." They felt like a net you might step into by accident. One afternoon, Henry stopped by with a box of carrots from his garden. He told me quietly that the thrift store had called earlier. The old TV had been resold, he said, to a woman up the road. He didn't mean it like news. He meant it like a fact that moves through life. "Tell her to be careful," he said. "Or don't. Some things find people who are already ready to watch." That night I made tea and sat by the new set. I felt safer, but I also felt older and softer in the way you do when you have noticed how thin the world's edges are. I checked the locks, said a small goodnight to the house, and turned off the light. If your television ever shows you something you did not film, if it plays little films of your house when you were asleep, if it writes soft words across the snow of its screen, take the set out to the garage. Pull the plug. Donate it. Tell someone. Sometimes breaking the thing that remembers is the same as letting it go. Good night. Hey friends, welcome back to Horror Stories Bedtime. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the room settle. Listen to the rain against your window, the kind of soft, distant rain that feels like it's trying to remind you of something. Tonight's story is about a man who bought an old house and found a door that wouldn't open. He thought it was just another quirk, just one more thing to fix on the weekend. But some doors don't need repairs. They need silence. My name's Jack Reynolds, and 3 years ago, I bought a house that should have been someone else's problem. It was one of those cheap estate sales, 2 stories, wide yard, decent structure, needs TLC, as the listing said. It sat at the far end of a quiet street in Indiana, a town where people still wave at you from their porches, even if they don't know your name. The place had character, sure, peeling paint, creaky floors, and a backyard that looked like it hadn't seen a lawnmower since the Obama administration. But I was 35, newly single, and too stubborn to rent again. So I bought it. The first night I moved in, the house smelled like cedar and dust. Old houses always smell a little like someone else's life. I unpacked, set up a folding chair in the living room, and cracked a beer to celebrate. It was quiet, too quiet. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no hum from the fridge yet. Just the kind of stillness that feels like holding your breath. I remember glancing at the basement door that night. It was painted shut, thick, uneven layers of beige paint around the handle. The keyhole had been filled in years ago, like someone didn't want it ever opened again. I made a mental note, deal with that later. Weeks passed, and the house began to feel normal. The pipes groaned, the floorboards popped, and sometimes the upstairs window rattled in the wind. All the usual noises you get used to when you live alone. But there was one thing I couldn't shake, the sound that came from behind that basement door. At first it was faint, a low hum, like a refrigerator running in another room. Then sometimes, a single tap, quiet, careful, like someone testing the wall from the other side. I thought it was plumbing. I thought it was air pressure. I thought it was anything but what it sounded like. One afternoon, I asked my neighbor, Mr. Hadley, about the house's history. He was in his 60s, wiry, with a farmer's tan and eyes that had seen too many winters. When I mentioned the locked basement door, he paused mid-sentence. "You didn't open it, did you?" he asked. "No, why?" He scratched his chin. "Just don't go forcing it. The last guy who lived there, well, he had a bad time with that room." "What do you mean?" He looked over my shoulder at the house, like he didn't want to be seen talking about it. "Old stories. I don't know how much is true, but they say someone used to keep things down there that shouldn't have been kept." "Things?" He shrugged. "No one ever figured out what. Cops came once before my time, but they didn't stay long." Then he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You'll be fine. Just leave the old house alone." Of course I didn't. That night, I sat on the bottom stair and listened. The hum was there again, low and steady. I pressed my ear against the door. For a few seconds, nothing. Then a sound like faint breathing. Not steady, not mechanical. Human. I jerked back. Waited. Listened again. Nothing. I laughed it off and told myself it was echo, maybe my own breath bouncing off the wood. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, the sound came more often, always at night, always after midnight. Sometimes it was that soft breathing. Sometimes it was a faint scrape, like something being dragged across the floor. Once I swore I heard a voice, not clear, just a low murmur that rose and fell, like someone talking in their sleep. So, like any idiot in a horror story, I decided to open the door. I bought a heat gun and a putty knife from the hardware store. Spent the afternoon scraping paint from the hinges and frame. The more I worked, the more it felt like the door fought back. The wood was dry and stubborn, and every time I pried a corner loose, a thin puff of dust came out, the kind that smells old and wrong. Finally, after 2 hours, I got it loose enough to pull. The door didn't swing open, it groaned. The air that came out was cold, damp, heavy, like it hadn't moved in decades. I shone my flashlight down the stairs. They were narrow and steep, covered in cobwebs. Concrete walls, shelves of old tools, a furnace, and near the back, a wooden door built into the foundation. Another door. This one had no knob at all, just a chain looped through 2 hooks and tied tight. The light caught something scratched into the wood, a word carved deep. Stay. Something about that word hit me like a warning whispered too late. I stepped closer, the beam of the flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The air smelled like wet iron. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I felt the ground shift slightly under my boots, like there was something hollow beneath the concrete. Then came the sound again, that soft breathing. Only this time, it wasn't from behind the inner door. It was from the shadows beside me. I swung the light around. Nothing. Just the furnace and the old pipes. But when I turned the light back to the wooden door, the chain was swaying gently, like it had just been touched. I didn't run. Not yet. Because fear doesn't always come all at once. Sometimes it comes slow, like a leak. I backed up the stairs, closed the basement door, and pushed a chair against it. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the basement again. The wooden door was wide open, and a dark hallway stretched beyond it, lined with doors, all identical, all locked. Something moved behind one of them, dragging something heavy. I woke up gasping. The basement was quiet. The house too. But when I went to make coffee in the morning, the basement door was open an inch. The chair had been moved. I locked it, nailed it shut, And for a while that worked. About a week later, I noticed something strange. The house felt different. The air colder. The lights dimmer. At night, I could hear a faint knocking again, not from below, but from the walls themselves. Once I woke to find dirt on the kitchen floor, like someone had tracked it in. The back door was still locked. Every window was closed. The next morning, my neighbor Mr. Hadley stopped me at the mailbox. "You all right, Jack?" he asked. "Yeah, why?" "You got lights on in your basement every night. Didn't figure you for a night owl." My blood went cold. "I don't have lights down there," I said. "The power's off." He looked confused. "Well, something's lit. I see it from the yard sometimes, like a lantern glow." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on. And at exactly 2:46 a.m., I heard the hum again, louder than ever. Then the faint sound of chains rattling. And beneath it, a voice. Low, tired, hoarse. It said one word. "Open." I don't remember deciding to move. But by sunrise, half my clothes were in the truck. I left the key under the mat and drove to my brother's place 2 hours away. I didn't tell him why. Didn't tell anyone. A week later, I got a call from the real estate agent. She said the house was back on the market. The buyer had backed out. She didn't say why. Curiosity is a poison that pretends to be logic. I drove back one last time just to see. The basement door was open again. Both of them. The air coming out was freezing. And from inside that hollow dark, I heard the sound of something moving. Slow, steady, like someone dragging a chain across concrete. I called the sheriff the next morning, told him to check it out. He called me back a few days later. Said the basement was empty. Said they found something weird, though. A narrow hole behind the wall, leading to a small bricked-in room. Inside that room was a wooden chair. And on the wall behind it, carved into the stone, a single sentence. "If it opens, stay." I don't know who wrote it. I don't want to. I never went back. The house sold again eventually. Someone else lives there now. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear that same low hum, faint and far away, like a memory trying to find its way back. And I wonder if every house has one door you shouldn't open. Not because of what's inside, but because of what might finally get out. Good night.